welcome everyone to our webinar today on how to win enterprise deals. So for those of you who haven't met before, my name is Kayla Ellice. I am the founder and managing director over at Inception Marketing. So we help MSPs and technology service providers to basically discover exceptional marketing. And today I am joined by Greg Rudakov. I hope I didn't butcher your name, Greg.
Rudakov, but that's
Rudakov,
all good.
there we go, who is the founder of Support Fusion. So Support Fusion is essentially a ticketing triaging system that helps MSPs deliver exceptional customer service. And we're going to dive into that a little bit more later. But Greg has spent 25 years building, buying, and running technology services businesses. Before founding Support Fusion, he was the head of IT teams at places like Spotless and KPMG. And he previously launched Device Desk, which was a procurement automation platform for MSPs across Australia and New Zealand. So having worked across those larger businesses, Greg is very much about the MSP enterprise relationship. And today he's actually going to be busting some myths around, there's some preconceived ideas in the market around how MSPs or smaller technology service providers can't win enterprise deals because they're not big enough. And Greg is here today to bust those myths, aren't you, Greg? So
I am.
We
Absolutely.
are going to dive straight into it. We're going to talk about what it actually takes to win an enterprise deal, as well as what you can do from a marketing perspective to help with that. And then we're going to talk about the Support Fusion marketing story and how you guys have taken that same approach. So how about we dive straight into it, Greg? Welcome to the webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm looking forward to it today.
Okay. Are we going to go straight into some myths?
We are.
I think that's...
Yep. Well, first of all, I think this one's really important, right? You when we were prepping for this webinar, you sort of brought this one up and was like, so many MSPs or technology service providers count themselves out before they even have a go, right? And, you're going to talk about what's important when it comes to, tenders and having a look for that type of stuff. But it's really often quite sad, isn't it, to see that so many people count themselves out before they even have a go. And when the reality actually is that it's the perception that's barrier.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that assumption can be a real killer because there is so much opportunity that is there up for the grabs and doesn't necessarily get the light of day just because of this, perception that they may not be applicable or may not even have a seat at the table.
Why do you think it is? I mean, we're about to jump into the myths, but why do you think that is the case for a lot of, I suppose, technology service providers?
I have a lot of theories. There is... MSPs in general are built from a sort of a tech orientation, a tech audience. There's not a natural kind of sales and growth mentality just in general, and putting themselves out there. We're all a little bit closeted, a little bit shy. So I think our natural inclination is to stay with what we know. And, I think this is also a big part of what we'll talk about today is sort of, it is about getting out there and actually, sort of breaking down a few of those sort of mental barriers to actually capture opportunities. So it's
right.
everyone's a little bit different, but I think it's more just sort of getting the courage and really just, trying to have a go. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's jump into our first myth. Enterprise only buy from other big players. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so this is what I think is the primary sort of reason. It's a sort of David and Goliath problem. You've got a big company out there. Maybe it's an ASX 200, ASX 20, a large Australian business corporate. Why would an MSP who is sort of dealing with accounting firms and law firms and sort of smaller groups even feel that they're a player there? And I don't think that's true. I mean, when I was in the infrastructure space, so I spent a lot of time largely infrastructure operations, which is really like are kind of having a team that is akin to an MSP. It's all of the guys and girls who are working on routers and switches and networks and Office 365 and whatever it might be in these corporates. We're sort of largely doing the same job, but at the same time, not everyone in my team could be an expert in all those technologies. Even if I had a reasonably large team myself, we still looked for niche, smaller players that did one or two things really, really well. It might be you're just an absolute gun at, Cisco Wi-Fi, or, at M365 or at Teams or whatever that might be. And sometimes, I would get genuinely approached by, one, two, three people shop who just did some stuff really, really well. And they would be just as appealing because they're responsive. I can just talk to them. I don't have to go through layers and layers of account reps and, formal sort of bids and emails and quotes, and everything gets stacked onto the pricing. I can talk to a founder of an MSP, a principal of an MSP, and do a deal on the spot, right? And like that is not impossible. That is a really, compelling way to work. And then we'll go into, what does that also represent in terms of, probity and structuring in the sort of corporate world. But ultimately, the buyer has a lot of sway, and if they feel that they'll get a really good outcome from a smaller player, size is not a problem. It's just generally a myth.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think you've said it on the slide here. It's they smaller players generally have that ability to go deeper, right? And to solve a particular problem. I think that's something that's really often quite forgotten. Like, you don't have to sell all of your services to get into an enterprise customer. It's often better that you start with something smaller and one, I suppose, pillar of delivery, rather than trying to sell everything, and then, because you can always work your way up, right?
Of course, you can get in, you do one thing well, and then you get a seat at the table, and that's exactly
That's
how you may even become a big business. Is
Yeah.
if that's your agenda. So
Yeah,
absolutely,
exactly.
it's a barrier that's just brought on. It's a self barrier. It's not something
Yeah,
that you don't have that seat.
yeah,
For sure.
yeah, definitely. All right, what about the next myth, which is security and legal reviews will sink us? Ooh, that's interesting. I've not heard that one before.
Yeah, so this is a similar, like, okay, all right, maybe I am big enough. Maybe I do have some value to offer. But as a smaller, provider, I don't want to be, spending thousands and thousands of dollars on legal reviews, or sitting with security, vendor assessments and all those sorts of, process and bureaucracy. I just want to sort of, get the work done. And again, most large companies have a pragmatic approach. They're not like going to take, a small MSP and apply, the same rigor that they would around a Telstra, or someone on a multi-million, multi-billion dollar sort of, business scale. They do genuinely look at the size of the risk, and what is happening, and what is the scope of the work, in order to sort of review things pragmatically. No one wants to be tied up in bureaucracy, despite, there being large teams and that sort of thing. The other point in this is security, and this is an interesting one. As I've worked in small and large, and sold and sort of bought both ways. There's this barrier, particularly with the focus on cybersecurity these days, that or if I don't have a particular certification, I'm not an ISO, or there's no way they'll accept me. That's not the point. The point of having vendor review, security review, governance, is to make sure that you're doing things properly. And if you're not doing things properly, you're carrying risk on your own business anyway. You just need to have established practices. And again, if you have a smaller footprint, in a smaller business, you actually have more opportunity to sort of control that and bound it well than a really large business does with, multiple moving parts and so many different people. And, we all know that sort of people's one of the greatest security risks, right? So that the sort of smaller you are, the tighter you can be, and you can actually really employ good security practice with not too much difficulty. And as long as you have articulated that, or you may want to have like a security statement. It's not that hard to build up, or be a little bit more proactive around, you have thought about this stuff. That goes a massively long way into the risk review around dealing with, a smaller shop with a larger enterprise. And the finally, like, it's actually the commercial terms that matter the most. The legal terms, you're probably not going to want to negotiate. You're not going to want to spend a lot of time and effort on. You'll probably have to accept, the customer's paper on that sense. They're the ones that have done all the risk review. But what you should have is, a focus on the commercial terms around the scope, the SLA, the triggers and things that matter that are going to affect your business. You got a lot more power in the commercial negotiation because you're doing that with like the buyer, not the legal team. And you can actually sort of talk about, well, what is it that makes this opportunity worth it or not for me as a business? What are the things that I'll be willing to accept commercially, the price per unit or whatever the commercial structure is, and what grounds there are for a termination or the term of the agreement, like those sorts of things. That's where you've got like real equal footing because you're working with a peer, you're working with someone who wants your services. So that's where the powerful discussion really happens. And then as long as in general, the legal terms and the things are satisfied and you have security and you have insurance in your business, you generally will be okay in that sense. You don't want to fall onto the legal side, and that's typically because the commercial side falls over. So I would say the commercial terms are the best place to sort of put your energy into.
Yeah, and just going back to the security side of it, there's so many, and I can see a few security people on our call today. I there's so many I guess less expensive or less rigorous sort of compliance frameworks that you can follow that are not ISO, because we all know that ISO is quite expensive to obtain. As long as you've got something in place, right, that is going to get you probably 80% of the way there, would you say?
Yeah, if you've got policies and controls and you can evidence them, that's the most important part. And, I can't think of anyone that I've ever worked with where it's like the deal breaker is the cert. It's not the cert, it's the posture. And I think that's where you do have that control, and there are certain advantages in being, smaller and lighter and fewer people that allows you to sort of control that easier in some ways as well.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. All right, next one. You have to say yes to everything. I definitely am guilty of this when trying to
Yeah,
obtain a customer.
so this sort of also, like, they all tie in together, these preconceptions, I guess. And the yes to everything is again that, like, the bigger player that does the whole stack, or the equivalent of the MSP doing the entire IT outsourcing for a smaller or SME business. Of course you don't have to say yes to everything. Like, corporates, enterprises, they are a panel of sourcing. We would have tens, maybe even hundreds of different providers, in larger enterprises that you source from, including, smaller specialist providers, and obviously the massive mega global integrators, doing their bit as well. And, the point is here that, it's all about doing the stuff that you do really well, and not pretending to, that you can do a bigger, broader scope than you are comfortable with or even capable of, because it's just introducing risk. And so, what we've observed, this is back to my own career, is that when you can work with a panel of providers, that gives you a lot of options. You can sort of change your sourcing mix, independently. And when, as a provider, you integrate well into that ecosystem, you make it simple for the enterprise to assign you work and work back with them. It just makes the whole thing simpler, in terms of your service effectiveness, and being able to stick to your lane in terms of what you do well. So and there's I'll cover this again a little bit further in terms of actually winning enterprise work, but you don't have to do everything. You can use other partnered providers to augment and club together on different solutions as well. And I think if you stick to your lane, then you're not going to be exposed.
So what would you say then? How should technology service providers navigate that conversation then with an enterprise customer? Like, because sometimes it does feel like you need to say yes to everything.
Well, I think it goes back to the commercial terms. It goes back to what is that enterprise actually after? Who is your buyer? What are they looking to achieve? What's the gap in their team that you're going to sort of augment or solve for them? And, stay in that lane. But like the walking away is important too, right? Because you don't want to, as the buyer in this case, you don't want to take on risk because you're stretching someone beyond their core capabilities, right? That's not good for anyone to have that. So I think it's about sort of being honest and true to what you do well. And, if there is an opportunity to do more than what you do well, see who you can play nicely with, work together with to solve that. Or it's not an opportunity for you. Like, don't take that risk. It's not good for either side.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So how do we actually win enterprise deals, Greg? Because I think everyone on the call and everyone that's going to listen back to this recording is probably here to actually go, well, tell me how I get into an enterprise customer, because that's going to solve all my problems. So what do people actually need to do, and what do they need to be looking out for?
Yeah, so when I was thinking about like how to actually sort of break into it, right? Like, so we've got rid of the myths and the barriers, and it's like, all right, well, I actually want to win some of this work. Where do I go? What do I do? Um, so obviously, tendering RFPs is a big part of sort of larger environments. They'll sort of package up pieces of work. They might have procurement teams that help the sort of the leaders within the IT group, kind of say, here's what we're doing, here's what we're taking to market. And this is definitely one opportunity. There are tender networks and apps out there that we can sort of get a feed of who's asking for what. And this is where generally you probably would partner up in the larger deals, because you'd want to be able to serve, an end-to-end tender in that sense. So quite often you would get a panel or a consortium, responding to a tender, like, in Gov or in some other industries as well. That's definitely one angle in, and you might be able to latch onto a team who has a more mature bid function to actually respond to this. So you're not doing it as the principal, because that's just going to eat up your time. Tenders are hard work. But if you're a particularly strong player in a certain technology and you can see this tender, you may have a window or opportunity to go through with other providers, and sort of, they might prime it or do the work, and you work out sort of the subcontracting or opportunity for you.
Yeah, I
More
went through the customer
directly,
last year who
yeah.
was who was a lot of their strategy was around government work. So they spent a lot of time on tenders, but one of their key strategies was actually to partner up with a prime, I think it's called.
Yeah.
And that's how they would naturally get a lot of their work, because they were able to do, they only had to respond to their little section.
Yeah. And I mean, I so many times I worked with groups over the years where, it wasn't just a single player, big player. It was someone was definitely priming the deal,
Yeah.
and then there
Yeah.
would be farming out, certain lines into that. And that is a very workable idea. I mean, I like the idea of working with specialists. I want people with the depth. I don't want someone that sort of had to quickly hire and fill in a skill set.
So
So
how do they find a prime? How would people on this call, and MSPs, or even, I suppose, specialist consultants, how would they find a prime? How do you find a prime?
I think you've got to look through your peer grouping, right? There's a good collegiate industry around MSPs that sort of I've certainly observed, and it's about understanding and working with those fellow owners, fellow founders, and principals who you can sort of work out, if if there's a win-win on the table, people open their doors, right? You might be
Yeah.
cyber, someone else is sort of end user compute, and there's a deal that you can do around that. Great. That's a great club to have because you've suddenly got a breadth that sort of serves, a huge use case. So I think it's a bit of peer networking ultimately that does that, and I think MSPs are good at that because you sort of can talk to each other. In as similarly minded individuals. Maybe not always, but yeah.
And there's so many, I think, opportunities for that now with all of our peer groups, ConnectWise, they are, SMB There's so many different ways in which you can find your tribe, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think if you've got like an opportunity on the table, people are closing their door on you. That's one less thing they have to work on to win, right? So,
Yeah.
if you can come in with an idea, with an opportunity, I think that's a real good, icebreaker in terms of establishing or saying, could we work together on this? In terms of the running through a few of the other points, connecting. So this is more traditional outbound, sort of sales. The infrastructure, the operations managers within the IT department in larger enterprises, that's your go-to. That's the person who typically can straddle, kind of the C-level suite in terms of ultimate decision making and budget unlocking, but they're clearly still practitioner enough to understand the value that you bring, and they also know the gaps in their function. And so I think that was typically the role I was playing in most of my corporate life, after sort of moving up from being on the tools, was really just having that handle of all of the different technologies that underpin an organization, and which ones are we serving well versus which ones do we need help with. And that's the sort of individual I think that's a really good entry point if you're looking for a way to sort of open your network and start to get on the radar of the decision makers in larger businesses. The positioning you take, of what you do, it's got to talk to like the need that they have, not all the wonderful capabilities you have, what amazing certs you've got, and all of that sort of thing. If that person doesn't have a need, they're not going to talk to you, right? So, you got to think about how you've solved already a similar situation. Maybe you've identified, as if you're connected with someone, that they're in the same industry that you've already done some amazing work with, and how you differentiate. Why are you better than maybe the bigger player they might already be working with, or what successes you can sort of trade on a little bit that will solve their pain point better than perhaps they're doing today, or that someone else could be doing. And so I think you've got to be really specific and tailored. If you just be broad and say, we do this, everyone does that. You're no different, right? You're just part of marketing noise. You've got to nail in your story and, narrow down. And not everyone's ready to buy. So like, that's fine. There's going to be things that's not now, but if people know what you do, you might get a call back at some point.
Yeah.
The proof and the trust is critical in the sort of enterprise side. They will always be looking for, extra evidence. It can't just be, trust me, I've done this before, So, there is a world of, of case studies and reference calls. It doesn't have to be heavy-handed. You probably should be thinking about this in general in terms of, how you position yourself and, all the great things that you might have done. But, trust is really important. I think that's an area where, if you don't have that, you will lose points to some extent in terms of being able to position yourselves as a true player to solve a problem with someone. And then the last point around integration, very close to home, build a whole business around this. Enterprises work on systems. They're highly systemized. There's stuff moving in and out everywhere. You want to be a good integration citizen into that network. If you're going to force your customer to go down another pathway, break their existing process flow just to deal with you, you're not going to be attractive. You're just going to create this sort of friction point, or they're going to force you to sort of fold into their process anyway. So I think you can be really upfront, talk about the story about, again, if you are breaking in, you need to sort of position yourselves as someone who's a team player. I can fit into your process, not, my process is the only way, or you can't work with me. And I think that's an important element in all of this, is that, you integrate well.
You need to be adaptable, right? Like that is really the key to getting an enterprise deal. And look, like you said earlier on, there's some things that you shouldn't negotiate on. Like if there's, something that you can't do, or, it's outside of your scope, and sure, walk away. But if there's things that you can be fluid on, or, adaptable to, then be adaptable to those things, right? Like that's going to be attractive.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. So I suppose with everything that Greg said, I'm going to put a bit of a marketing flavor on it and go, so what are enterprise buyers essentially looking for from you? So I think I told this story in our last webinar. I was part of a quite a large enterprise deal in the transport space. It took 5 years to close that deal. Like, we know that we don't live in a world of short sales cycles. So what can you do from a marketing perspective to help align your branding and your marketing to an enterprise style customer? And that first one is really that brand credibility, right? Like, you want to be doing thought leadership. You want to be writing things that are of credible value. And even PR, we find that PR as well is a really good way for customers to build that credibility. You want to come across like you're a real business. So when that enterprise customer goes and Googles you and a news article pops up, that's going to be a lot more creditable than just, your website. Again, to Greg's point, like coming up with tailoring that messaging for that industry relevance, or that that proof point that you need for that particular customer, is going to be really key. So if you can get case studies and things like that align to different industries, and you can present that to the customer, obviously if they're in that same industry, then that's going to make you look really good to that customer. The reality is, with enterprise customers, they've got a huge selection of users that they could of companies that they could potentially use. So if you can tailor your messaging to their specific pain point, their specific industry, their specific buyer persona, then that is going to really narrow that playing field. Like, they're going to go, okay, this person actually gets my problem. They're going to be able to talk my language. I don't have to re-explain all the nuances of my industry. So that's going to get you pretty far as well. As Greg said, customer proof. So make sure you've got your case studies there. Make sure you've got logos, testimonials, your security. You raised the security thing, Greg. Like, making sure that that's on your website or on your case studies. Getting those, those security logos on there as well, I think is going to be really important. This is really where that buttoned up look really needs to come in. Is where have you got those certifications, those things that make you look like a real business. And then buyer alignment. So, making sure that you've got, like I said before, those stories, that thought leadership that is going to align to that buyer persona. Who is the person? So, Greg, you said that it was the operations manager or the infrastructure manager, I think, or procurement officer. How do we position your marketing so that it talks directly to that person? And then I also thought, let's talk about what it's going to take to go beyond that founder-led marketing as well, because often we see that, the founder is generally the most passionate person in the room, and they're the ones that are going to do the selling. But usually there's a team of people underneath them that you need to be leveraging to be able to respond to that tender, go out and do that sale, deliver on that, I suppose that what you've promised the customer. So I think from a marketing perspective, build that repeatable content engine. Do webinars regularly, write blogs every 2 weeks, get your social media up and running so that you are constantly putting out that thought leadership that then, like I said in the previous slide, builds that brand credibility for you. Segment your campaigns as well. So, how how do you make sure that you're not targeting your SMB customers with the same content, or more importantly, you're not targeting your enterprise customers with the same content that you've developed for your SMB customers? Make sure in your CRM that you are, segmenting those types of customers out, putting them on different nurture journeys if you're that far down the line with your marketing, so that they get a relevant piece of content. And think of that when you're developing your marketing plan. Think of that when you're developing what content you want to do, and put that into that nurture journey. Give that to that customer. And it doesn't mean you're not going to create content for your SMB customers, or your mid-market customers, but make sure that there's a little bit of separation there. Leverage your team. Encourage your technical staff to get out there on LinkedIn. Get them out there. Get them, showing their faces. And I know that this can be quite a, it can be quite a hard thing to do if you're a technical person. You're not sort of comfortable with that a lot of the time. But I think that, if they can get out there and be active on social media, then when, like I said, that customer is Googling you, that type of stuff is going to pop up too. They've got a really engaged team. And like Greg sort of pointed out before, usually with an MSP or a smaller TSP, they are a lot more engaged, right? They can pick up the phone and know that that person's going to get an answer. It sort of shows that, I think, when you've got an engaged team on LinkedIn and, they're happy to show their faces. I think it gives the customer confidence. And then measure and refine. So, making sure that your analytics dashboards are up to date. Track your enterprise pipeline. Track your content, open rates, click-through rates, website analytics of those enterprise customers, and see what they are interacting with and what is resonating with them. I think that is going to, like I said, I've given this example before, that enterprise deal that I was a part of, it was a constant case of refining the content, bringing it back to the buyer group, going back. The sales team would come back to marketing and edit that content and create new content that was, solving the problem of that buyer group. And so when the sales team met with them the next 6 months, they had a whole bunch of content. So it's really about that, measure and refine. You're constantly going in this figure eight circle. So Greg, based off what I've said, talk to us about what Support Fusion's been going through for the last couple of months, because you guys are quite new to the market. You officially launched 1st of July, is that right?
Yeah, basically, launched onto the market in July. Basically formed this year though. So, Christmas, New Year, we were nothing more than an idea. So absolutely a new market entrant from that perspective. And not dissimilar, we're a small team. There were a couple of co-founders and a small group sort of helping us out around the side. So we know that sort of world of sort of getting a new brand out there very intimately, or getting a brand out there, let's say, and all of the things that sort of come with that. So in general, sort of run through the process, we've sort of taken with Support Fusion. Absolutely leverage LinkedIn. In fact, probably every opportunity that we've had so far has originated through LinkedIn. A little bit out of Reddit, actually one out of ChatGPT, an inquiry came in as well. And that speaks to some of the other points now that I'll cover at the end. But, there's such a big difference with having a company with some faces and a little bit of light branding and occasional posts on LinkedIn than someone that's just sitting there with an empty profile. If your customer, particularly in the enterprise space, who are a lot more active on LinkedIn, obviously, jumps over to your company page, and there's dribs and drabs and nothing new. It's not a good feeling, right? You don't want to see that. You want to see engagement. You want to see nice, happy people and that sort of thing. It doesn't have to be fake. You can post content on what you are all about and what your business does and the customers you serve. So big advocate of LinkedIn, and I think it's applicable to sort of all levels. It's not just something that's limited to kind of corporate influencers or big enterprises. probably the most important thing that we sort of learnt through our journey historically in sort of founding new businesses is validation first. Not so much an issue maybe in the services space, but sort of in a product space, talking to customers early and understanding, what they need solved before building anything, was a huge learning for us. And actually capturing the way the customer describes what they're going through is a real, like, gold mine of content and marketing language and opportunity. As I talk to people, and just this advent of AI note takers, and the world being online now, it's just absolutely transformed how easy it is to capture the voice that the customer speaks in, what they're actually dealing with in terms of their day and what they need, and ended up creating like this content loop for our business, where we would take a call, we would understand how a customer positions their problem, we'd update the website, you could generate a blog on the back of the transcript, you could promote that. It's like minutes of work in the sort of AI era we're in now. And if you can't do that as a founder, you can use an agency to help you with that. But the core content comes from those meetings where you're talking with the actual customer, because one of the hardest things to do is like write copy and try and work in the customer's shoes. And I think we're just in an unbelievable era now where that customer voice is so easily accessible and can be marketed in so many different ways. Then talking to the sort of regular posting. What regular means, that's really up to you, but it's definitely not once or twice a year. We made a conscious effort to post twice a week. We had the benefit of two kind of co-founders. One focused on sort of go to market and storytelling, and the sort of customer perspective and the pain point, and the other is we're building a product, so building in public and being able to do demos of what are we building this week, how's it going, how does it get used by our audience, and how are they sort of influencing the product we're building. These are things that, again, do not take a lot of effort to produce, but the return is phenomenal. And strangely enough, like, you may not see people, clicking like or putting a comment on LinkedIn, but the amount of times I would follow up, with a prospect, and they'd go, "Oh, we watch every one of your videos. We can't wait for the Friday video to come out." It's like, could you click like, maybe
I
once?
know,
But
it's so
like, they
frustrating.
actually engaged,
Yeah.
they are watching it, they are actually taking it in and learning. And it's all part of that reputation building and being known for something, and the timing then being something that they reach out when it's applicable. But because you've done it, they know you're there, and you're actually progressing deals without them even being on your radar, because you're posting content about what you do, what you've done for who, and that's just so powerful. If you're not putting that out there, how do you expect people to find you? And then I guess the final point on that is, you know, I don't believe people are going to go out and read the blogs we write, but what we do know, and we've seen evidence of, is that Google and the AI LLMs out there are reading those things as sources of information that help position what you do as a product or service in the market that you're operating with. And so it does not hurt to sort of put content out in written form, for the machines, maybe not so much the humans anymore, because the humans do definitely love video more, I think, and I'm far more interested in a more visual, shorter take on something than maybe reading a big document. But both have their purpose, and I think for me personally, they've both proven to be highly valuable in our journey, and I'm sure they're equally as applicable in MSP TSPs as well.
Oh, absolutely. I love your point as well. We're about to move to Q&A. So if anyone does have any questions, drop them in to the Q&A for us. But while we are waiting for questions to drop in, I have to agree with you. The frustration of someone saying to me, well, it's not frustration, but it's like, oh yeah, I see your stuff on LinkedIn all the time. You're always sharing stuff. It's like, well, should you drop a like in? Because that's what keeps me going, right? But it's super important is that, yeah, people are watching, even if you don't think they are. So making sure that you are, continuously and consistently, I think that's the key there, is the consistency of putting up content is really important. And it can be in all different forms. Like you said, it can be in blogs, it can be in LinkedIn articles if you're talking about that written form. Videos are great. I think if you can put your face, I'm always trying to encourage the business leaders of the businesses that we work with to put their face on LinkedIn, because the reality is people buy from people, right? They want to see your face. They want to be able to relate to you. And I think that's probably the overarching, I guess, theme of this whole webinar, right? Is that it doesn't really matter the size. Like, if you can solve the problem and you can relate to the customer, whether that's personally or through your content, you're going to be able to get something, right? It's about the person and the problem that's being solved, not about the size of your business.
Yeah. I think yeah, to that point, the regularity of posting is important, because not everyone is sitting all day on LinkedIn, right? They're not always going to see the post that you did last week. And like you can get into this feeling that you're repeating your story. I'm always talking about the same thing. I'm always, showing the same stuff. But like, not your audience changes dynamically. What you posted at 10 o'clock got missed. And even if you're posting now at 2 p.m., it's a new audience who might see this and might take something from it. And so without that regularity, you're just missing huge slabs of people. It's not to say that you repeat your post every day of the same stuff, but it's not as repetitious from the receiving end, I guess, when you put things out there.
Yeah, it's a great point. And, testing that as well, like seeing when content resonates more with some people than others is also really important. We run these webinars at all different times, like, because we're also trying to see what times work best for people, what times don't. So I think there's definitely, you're right, it can feel quite repetitive to us, and it can feel like we're doing the same thing day in, day out. But to the customer, like you say, they're not always seeing everything. So, making sure that or they see it 2 weeks later, thanks to LinkedIn, because, LinkedIn likes to show us content from 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. The other thing is that, I guess anecdotally, but I think it's proven pretty well as well, that almost all of the algorithms, be they sort of, Google or, ChatGPT or LinkedIn, they want to see freshness. They want to see regular content. They don't want to see the same stuff that they indexed last month. Like, everything will drop back in the world if you don't continue to move and have a momentum. And, again, it sort of speaks to that regularity point. Even if the engagement doesn't feel like it's there, you won't even get hurt at all if you just sort of stop. You'll just disappear.
That's it. Well, thank you so much, Greg, for joining us today. And thank you for everyone who joined. If you do have any questions later on, my details are on the screen at the moment. So feel free to shoot me through an email with a question. And if it's something that Greg's going to answer, I will shoot it through to him. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. And we'll see you on the next webinar.